my name's Banos Solomou, and I'll do an intro later on, but effectively the subject of the talk is the problems with legacy and the impact on continuous delivery in large financial institutions where I've spent a few years working. I don't know how familiar everybody here is with the kind of continuous delivery, what it's trying to achieve, how it operates. Maybe we do a quick show of hands. Does everybody know read material and maybe has done some implementations? So fair majority. All right, good, fine. And so I'm going to look at some of the things in these larger organisations, these old banks, and maybe if you haven't worked in a bank, you're thinking about it, maybe set some expectations of what is possible, what's not possible. I mean, they've not really been technology companies until very, very recently. Even if they've had technology for a long time, it's really not been treated as such. And I think that's why the old Phoenix Project book was so good, because it just kind of lays that story out fairly plainly. And they're huge companies, a lot of people, a lot of corners, a lot of things going on, a lot of real legacy, and a lot of some quite interesting new things going on as well. So, this first picture is that's Pastor Kevin Fast. He's breaking the world record there, pulling a Boeing Globemaster 3, 188 tons, and he managed 8.8 meters, which was the world record back in 2009. He was 39 years old at the time. And I saw that and I thought that's a really good indication of what legacy feels like working in these organisations. I've done a couple of stints in some smaller companies, and when you have access to production infrastructure where you can actually deploy, it's a whole different ball game than when you hit the kind of issues that this guy's feeling when he's pulling that plane. And they do carry a lot of these issues. So I've tried to just capture there things like the actual IT systems themselves, the people, and also the agreements and contracts they have with various vendors, software or management or otherwise. Looking through the news, change has always been an issue in terms of funding, remediating things. They always want to get rid of old technology, but they rarely seem to actually achieve it in my experience. So they end up with this ever-growing chain of legacy, both in terms of the software and the hardware platforms that they run on. But there, that is changing. There's huge budgets being spent on digital transformation, among other things. We see a lot of problems in these organisations where they bring in new things, but they treat them in very similar old patterns as they always have. And surprise, surprise, that doesn't necessarily bring many advantages. I think Conway's law is what comes to mind there. So we need bigger change other than just the systems and the technology. And that bottom line, I think sums it up. It just kills the continuous aspect in its tracks. There's still a lot we can do, a lot we can achieve, a lot of automation, but continuous delivery, trying to deploy, small batches into production is something that can be not only possible in some cases. So, a little bio. I don't know who's old enough to recognise Kane from Kung Fu as he walked the land, spreading wise knowledge and useful stuff. We can only dream. So I started back in Enterprise Bank back in 2004, and pretty much been in banks and large organisations like this for a majority of the time since then. Usually, working alongside development teams, which is what I'm doing at the moment, trying to do the stuff that development teams don't want to do, try and get them to a place where they can flow and get change kind of moving in a managed manner, measurable manner, all these kind of things that we talk about as part of the whole continuous delivery pipeline. Internal and external facing systems I've worked on, and definitely the internal facing systems are a lot easier to work with than the external facing systems, absolutely. And this is a little talk about some of the common issues that maybe some of you guys have encountered as well. And the philosophical quote that came from Kung Fu might spread as he moves around. You might realise I just stole that straight from Deming. So yeah, shared infrastructure. I hate shared infrastructure. The amount of grief it causes is unbelievable. I think the pictures are, it's a shame there's not a car park full of those trucks. Trying to deploy different systems onto the same servers. That's been happening for a long time. Even with the large scale use of virtual machines now. In a lot of these organizations, you're still treating VMs like physical servers. I don't know if any of you guys have a favorite VM, right? Are you treating them like pets? You're treating them like cattle, right? Come on. But yeah, trying to load too many systems on a VM, it doesn't matter. It's the same as a physical. You have the same resource issues, the same project scheduling constraints, the same testing constraints. So you know, in a lot of ways, stuff hasn't moved on when it comes to the use of virtual machines. In a lot of cases, I've said that you just don't have access to production systems. You can't deploy. You can't even schedule a deploy yourself. You've got to go through another team, and we'll get started on that one in a minute. And it's not only to production, but also to test systems. Where you have integrated test systems that they just have a pile of rubbish, for want of a better term, on them. It's like you need to go through another team, they'll schedule a deployment, they may even configure the environment for you. Of course, they'll screw it up. You'll have to go through a couple of rounds of that before you manage to get a system up and running you can actually test. Disk space. Why do we keep running out of disk space? 2016, right? But 100 gig is ridiculously expensive, right? In a lot of these on-premise or VM environments, I mean, you know, if you're working in an AWS or cloud-like infrastructure, it's a whole different ballgame. But the legacy inside these organizations where they're still holding on to, you know, all their data in-house in their data centers, you know, the managed services, the managed VMs, whatever, seem to be ridiculously expensive. And with the sharing of these things, it's obviously, you know, you have the usual problems. Someone's going to write out some ridiculous amount of debug login and take down another system or service, whatever. That creates a lot of noise, and this is a self-perpetuating problem. So disk space. Superficial cloud I've written up there because this is something that's starting to appear in these organizations now. So, you know, we can't put our data out in AWS. It's public. Everyone's going to steal it. And we're banks. So, you know, what do? So they try and build their own internal clouds. And I've seen one of those spectacularly just die. You know, or they go to their vendors to bring, you know, a cloud in-house. And how are we doing for time? I'm already halfway through. Yeah, but the cloud it's not a real cloud. It might be a stack of 3 physical servers with cloud software running on it. You've still got the same constraints. You might have a PaaS available on there, for example. You spin up VMs, ridiculously expensive VMs, £10,000 a year VMs, and they're very meager machines, right? But again, you know, these limitations are there. And interesting enough, I spotted, just as I started talking about that with some people, ThoughtWorks announced that Superficial Cloud is on their halt list, on their tech radar. So it's like, okay, it kind of makes sense. So yeah, I have a hatred for shared infrastructure. I have worked in one instance in AWS, and like I said, it opens it up. It's a completely different ballgame. You've got so many more ways that you can do things. Silos. How many times do I find myself working in a DevOps team? Right? It's so common. And I mean, these things, don't forget, these organizations, you know, however long they've been doing technology, whatever route they've taken, they all end up with these huge numbers of silos to centralizing just about every function and service you might possibly need access to. And of course, you know, there's going to be budget constraints around. They're going to want to keep the teams as small as possible with the workload. Workloads change, they can't cope. It takes days to turn around most requests to a lot of these kind of teams. And not only are we talking big centralized teams like you know, the whole ops organization that runs the infrastructure, but there'll be lots of sub-teams as well that are handling certificate requests and database users and all kinds of things that you might think, well, I need to play around with this stuff to innovate and you know, spin things up and break them down. That can be very, very difficult to do as well. And in a case recently, there was some teams wanting to deploy stuff, and they have to go to a team to do the deployment for them, the environment configuration. The SLA was a day to deploy something. Okay. It took them 4 days. And how many repetitions of that before you blow your sprints almost with every single deploy, right? So that creates then project dependencies and all kinds of problems beyond that. And of course, the central teams are backlogged because they're serving lots and lots of fast-moving agile projects, right? So this concept of silos is something that is always going to be a problem. If you can be a master of your own destiny, fantastic. You'll be in a much better position than if you're dealing with legacy aspects of these kinds of organisations. What else have we got? Yeah, teams and projects. I was going to put a picture of like Minions and the squads from Spotify and things like that on there, but then I just stumbled across this. Does anybody know what that is? Thanks, Alex. Yeah, and that's a simple one. I've seen these things with like just
That's 1-5.
That's UCM though. Yeah. So the organisation of these teams, so they can be. I'm thinking of a one classic project, which is very much a big ball of mud. Lots and lots of teams implementing lots and lots of requirements, isolated on feature branches. I'll put that in for Steve, by the way. And bringing that all back together again, trying to follow a release process that's like, the entry point is like 120 days before the target release. And the projects start bringing in their isolated test reports and where they are with their delivery. And as that clock ticks, they start to integrate code branches. They start to obviously find issues, start going through QA testing cycles and keep repeating. Why these things have established the way they are is one thing, but it's understand that they are there, understand the landscape within your working and what you can achieve when you're trying to automate everything. If you've got these kind of processes around you, you've got to somehow find a way to work with them, while you can find ways to change process, which is an even bigger problem. The third point was just a call out to technical debt, really. The concept of a project I keep whinging and moaning about as well. If you sit next to me, you might have heard it a couple of times. But the scope of a project, and especially when we're doing agile and we're not actually doing agile, I've seen this in a few places where you have a sprint zero, and what comes out of a sprint zero is a plan for X number of sprints with a delivery date at the end of it, and it's like, okay, there's things that come up along the way, right? I mean, you laugh, but it is actually quite a common problem. It's funny, but we'll do testing. Yes, we'll do testing, but don't do too much testing. Right? Again, all these kind of problems. So if you've got this project-centric view of the world, and you're going to postpone testing, when's it going to be added? After the end of your project? Are you going to pick it up in the next project? These kind of issues are very simple, but they are rife. And again, if you're going to invest an extra 15 to 30% of your time, whatever the estimates are, on taking a test-driven development view of the world, obviously your payoff is going to be much later down the line. So these things are swings and roundabouts. And even designs. So a lot of the design that happens to these organizations just repeat patterns that have happened over and over again. There's a lot of senior developers. When I say senior, sometimes I mean older, sometimes I mean good, very experienced. And but some of these guys have not looked at kind of a cloud-focused application design, portable design, whatever target infrastructure we're actually trying to achieve. Usually here, obviously, we're talking about continuous delivery. So trying to design a system for that, design it to be testable, all these kind of things are maybe not part of their vocabulary. So there's a lot of legacy in the teams, in the projects, as well as in the organisations. I think I'm trying to say. Yeah, security. So we're a bank, right? Everything. So access denied is so that's how firewalls work, right? By default, shut everything down. This is a good thing, right? Yeah. Okay. So how do you do continuous delivery when you've got a break glass process or a jump server in the way, right? So a break glass process is I've got to raise a ticket. Someone will give me access for a period of 8 hours or whatever it is. I run my continuous delivery for 8 hours. I do all my development, all my churn there, and then at the end of 8 hours, it shuts down. Yes. I don't know what they're thinking. And then jump servers as well. So obviously you don't have direct SSH access to your target production server. You got to log onto one box, and then you got to log onto the other box and run some scripts and this kind of thing. But you tend to start to find ways to work around these things. So you might have a script that you deploy when you finally get access, and maybe it'll be running on a timer, or maybe it will be listening on a port, so that when you promote your next release, this thing automatically gets picked up, and you're like, yeah, I don't know how that happened, right? I mean, it's quite funny because there's a phrase that we use, ask forgiveness, right? But I mean, you can get yourself into so much trouble. Yeah, software approvals as well. Just trying to get access to things like, I want to download the next 0.1 version of Jenkins. That needs to be approved. So you end up with these Jenkins instances with 2,000 builds on them, for example, that nobody touches for like many, many years. Quite common. Change boards. You got to deliver me a fixed version of what you're going to deploy in 2 weeks' time. So I'm going to do half my development in 2 weeks' time. But these processes, again, they've been there historically. A lot of problems. They're trying to manage, control incidents. Although we were having a discussion about an incident, just earlier today. No access to things like network-related changes, right? No DNS. I can't spin something up and then automatically create a DNS update for it, or a load balancer. All of a sudden, like, where are my A/B testings? Where's my blue-green deployments? Having to build this into your system. Another thing I didn't put up here is classically they've got this 2 data center model, a disaster recovery model. And you're trying to do some work, like one product we spun up at one place, they picked a Mongo database. Right? It's great, yeah, a bit of new technology, fantastic. Right, how does a Mongo database work in 2 data centers, right? One goes down, split brain, that's it, end of story. It goes into read-only mode, right? So we actually found I think I worked out that the arbiter, if that's hooked to the DNS name that flips over on the DR, because it doesn't hold any data, right? When the DNS name flips over to the other arbiter, the thing just still works. So you got you got a system that converts itself. Fantastic. So you end up finding ways to work around these things, which is a bit mental. Internal information systems that example was, just trying to get access to internal information, right? So someone sends you a document and you're reading through some change to some system they're trying to implement, and it has a link to something internal, and you click the link, access denied, right? So I have to raise a request, maybe wait a day or two, and meanwhile someone's going, so have you reviewed that document yet, right? So all these kind of things just continuously chew away at you in these organizations. I told you this was going to turn into a rant. Right? I did. Yeah, so is that it? Game over. We don't do continuous delivery. We don't even try to improve the flow and pace of software development in enterprise. So I say not quite. There's still a lot to do, and you're going to be hit by a lot of these things. That was the biggest, hairiest yak I could find. But know what to expect, right? Don't go into you can't go into these things blind. Have a look around at your landscape. Look at your system. What do your cycle times look like? Why? What's the value chain look like? How does it flow? Once you've got an understanding of these things, choose your fights, right? Some things you can work around, cheat, beg for forgiveness, and choose your team. Some areas of these banks are doing some really interesting things. We mentioned earlier some new technologies coming in, machine learning, AI, big data stuff, cloud stuff. They're all at it in different areas. So maybe you can find an area, you get it into a good place, and then that becomes a little poster boy. Yeah, move on to another area, and over time, you find other teams coming to your team saying, we want to work how you're working. We want to do the things that you're doing, use your tools, all these kind of things. So that does, it is starting to happen more and more. So these big oil tankers are representative of these big old enterprise organizations, and how slowly they move. That top one is a phrase, again, I've heard a couple of different organizations, evolutionary, not revolutionary. And it does mean slow incremental change. They're very risk averse, quite wisely so in some cases. But they're aware of what each other are doing. I think coincidentally today, Sterling Bank, which is one of the startup banks, announced that it's on the faster payments platform now. So now these startup banks can actually send money to and from immediately to other banks, right? So the seascape is changing. Big budgets like still being spent on digital transformations, on DevOps programs, on things with continuous delivery in the title that no one really understands what the impact is going to be. All these kind of things. You know, DevOps everywhere. There's a lot of new vendors coming into these big old banks as well, which is you know, quite refreshing. You know, the likes of the big players, they're having to change to accommodate for this as well. So this change is just starting to happen absolutely everywhere, and they are trying new things. I mean, I think it's public knowledge that Lloyd's had an AI bot servicing like support requests when people have problems logging in, and I think it's been, you know, quite successful. A little proof of concept, little trial, and they managed to get that out in a relatively short space of time, even with the paranoia and the regulation and the issues that could have come with it. And yeah, so there are these little pockets of success and little areas where things are changing. I think I'm just recalling I saw a talk recently. I think it was Nick Ferrier who was talking about 5,000 deploys a year somewhere at HSBC. I bet that was an internal system, but nonetheless, you know, that means you're getting root access to systems. You're getting your configuration management systems to respond to, you know, code changes. All this kind of. It's got to be all automated, right? So good stuff. Thank you.